Hi, good morning, and thank you so much to everyone for being here, and so much to the Newark Museum for organizing this wonderful exhibition and also the symposium. I'm going to be focusing very much on one specific piece in the exhibition, which is Juan Melé's Marco Recortado número 2 of 1946. This is a work that I think succinctly embodies both ambition and contradiction in equal measure. It's a work that represents the cutting edge of a very passionate debate at a key moment in the definition of geometric abstraction in the Americas. More specifically, I think this work is emblematic of the tension between formalism and politics that was at the heart of the avant-garde project in Argentina in the 1940s. And to overuse a metaphor, it's a work at the crossroads between Marxism and formalism. I'll start by tracing just a little bit of context. In 1944, a group of young artists, some of whom were still in their teens, published a single issue of this magazine, Arturo. Without going into the details of a very complex publication that defined itself as a magazine of abstract arts, yet contained a wide range of aesthetic proposals from automatic drawing, as we can see in this cover, through Torres Garcia to more hard-edge abstraction, and also a very rich and varied range of literary contributions. The most important text of this magazine was an article by the Uruguayan artist Rod Rothfuss, who's of this generation, proposing the shaped or articulated frame, of which Melé's work is a great example. So Arturo was the foundational document for a whole generation of artists who grappled with that very same project that had spawned avant-garde movements in Russia, Europe, and as this exhibition so beautifully demonstrates, in North America. The project could be summarized very broadly as a commitment to abstraction as a defeat of traditional aesthetics, so the idea of abstraction almost as a weapon. A desire to test the limits of what an artwork is and its status in the world of other things. And a wish to bring art and the extra-artistic into the same, or at least proximate realms. This extra-artistic realm can vary from the political to the spiritual to the industrial, according to the specific context in which the works are made, and of course, according to the artist's intentions. So from this initial nucleus of ideas, several artistic movements emerged after Arturo. Arturo was also very characteristic of so many avant-garde movements in that the movement was launched through the written word before the production of actual images or artworks. In 1944, when this magazine was published, Juan Melé was studying in night school at the National Art School. That was one of the options for another interesting thing about these artists is that they were mostly of working or lower middle class origins. And to study at night was the way that they could work during the day and then get their artistic training. So a group of these artists started to consolidate around the figure of Tomás Maldonado, the author of this cover and one of the editors of Arturo. Melé joined the group that in 1946 was named the Asociación Arte Concreto Invención, or the Association of Concrete Invention Art, and it's in the context of that group that the Marco Recortado painting was made. So for Melé, like many artists of his generation in Buenos Aires, that avant-garde impulse was tempered or shaped or colored by the specific conditions in Argentina at the time. The outbreak of World War II in Europe broke a very strong traditional connection between the Eurocentric Argentine modern intellectuals and the School of Paris, where the editors of Arturo or any aspiring young artist would have been expected just a few years earlier to finish their studies in Europe, Europe being the sort of finishing school for anyone who aspired to an artistic career. In 1944, there was clearly nowhere else. There was no Europe to go to. The dream of Europe as the cradle of Western civilization was shattered. So this forced isolationism added to the increased tension in the air in a country that was still debating its political allegiance to the Axis or to the Allies. Argentina only joined the war at the very, very end on the side of the Allies. Gave these artists a very particular sense of sitting right on the edge of history and provided a special urgency to their declarations and to their art. It also provided something of an opportunity to assert themselves in a vacuum and position themselves as leaders rather than followers with regard to European art. Melé and his colleagues looked back to Russian constructivism and to the union of art with radical politics for inspiration. Their declarations of the period regularly quote Lenin and Stalin and speak of how a new type of collective and abstract art objects will contribute to the class struggle and to the conquest of the revolution. Seen from today, we're almost speechless by these statements that were made between 1944 and 1946. And we ask ourselves if these artists were aware of what had actually happened in the Soviet Union, certainly with regard to aesthetics, but also more broadly with regard to politics since the 1920s. It seems like a very long time lag between the crisis in the Soviet Union and this generation. But this confusion is not only ours, and it's not only in hindsight. At the time, the official organ of the Argentine Communist Party, a magazine called Orientación, was among the very first to publish the theoretical texts by artists of this group, although this was predictably short-lived, and the magazine rejected the artists soon after once the editors realized just how far these artists were from the Soviet orthodoxy. To give an example of how radical Marxism was the lens through which all history, and specifically art history, was viewed, Carmelo Ardinquín, one of the editors of Arturo, in late 1945, wrote the following attack on surrealism, which he equated with Nazism. Quote, Marxist theory demonstrates that it, surrealism, is the ideological equivalent of Nazism in that it appropriates the conquests and effective solutions of new art, turning them into pseudo-revolutionary masks to obstruct the development of constructive art by serving neo-realist reactionary forces that wish to perpetuate what remains of bourgeois art. End quote. That's a very typical quote of the period in that extremely aggressive tone and in the constant quoting of Lenin and Stalin as role models or as important supporters in the struggle. So what's really fascinating in this generation is this, I think, completely unique combination of a commitment to revolutionary left-wing politics, to geometric abstraction, a desire to move beyond the history of European abstraction, to make an original contribution, and thereby breaking that former model of passive dependence, and the rebirth of a type of art that is anything but the art for art's sake, that would soon take hold in Europe through concrete art, Abstraction, Creación, and the Swiss concrete movement, even if the Argentine works are often inserted into this genealogy. So it's against this fertile, or perhaps even explosive, mix of elements that we should place Juan Melé's painting. In and itself, and in purely formal terms, the structured frame was perhaps not such a radical move as the artists thought they were. If we look at Picasso, Tatlin, and of course Charles Green Shaw, who's in this exhibition, all experimented with irregular compositions. To insist, as some have done, on the absolute originality of this proposal is to reduce art history to a horse race without considering how the same formal solution can mean different things at different times and in different places. When these Argentine works came to light in the early 1990s, it was very tempting to consider works like Melé's structured painting as a predating of Frank Stella's shaped canvases of the late 50s and early 60s. I'm guilty, I did that too. But even a quick glance at the two shows that there's obviously no real connection between these two artistic projects. One of the greatest contributions of exhibitions like Constructive Spirit is to present us with a more nuanced history of how and why artistic forms and languages travel through time and space. So Melé, with his colleagues in the Asociación Arte Concreto Invención, Tomás Maldonado, Alfredo Lito, Lidi Prati, Alberto Molenberg, Raúl Loza, and many others, it was a very large movement. It created a lineage of a very large movement in which almost nobody was above the age of 21 or 22. Created a lineage of modern art in which abstraction develops from Cubism into Neoplasticism and the Bauhaus in an incremental search, what they saw as an incremental search for greater objectivity and absolute values in art. And they placed themselves as the resolution of this process. That's the important part. Melé and his colleagues also seemed to be under the impression that all of these European artists were committed to left-wing politics, which they may well have been, but very probably not to the extent that they were imagined to be.